Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 7 of Book 2 of the Royal Ranger series, The Red Fox Clan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Maddie drew rein as they emerged from the tree line. The sight of Castle Heirloom never failed to take her breath away. The beautiful castle, with its soaring turrets and gracefully curving walls, dominated the landscape for miles around. Sited at the top of a long, gradual rise, it seemed at times to be floating in the air. Banners and flags stood out from its many flagstaffs, supported by the breeze that seemed to be a constant in this part of the kingdom. She reflected for a moment. She couldn't recall ever seeing the flags and banners hanging limply on their staffs. "I never get sick of seeing it again when I've been away," Ingrid said, noting the rapt expression on her mistress's face. Maddie nodded slowly, her eyes still riveted on the beautiful building before them. "It's stunning, isn't it?" Castle Heirloom had none of the uncompromisingly solid lines of a castle like Redmont's, but its beauty belied its strength. The tall walls and deep moat kept attackers at bay, and the towers and battlements afforded the defenders with a host of positions from which they could rain down arrows, spears, rocks, hot oil, and boiling water on those below. They sat for several minutes, admiring the sight of the graceful building. Then Maddie touched her heels to Sundancer's flanks and urged the horse forward. Ingrid followed suit, and they rode at a slow canter up through the beautifully landscaped parklands and carefully mown grass. There were only occasional clumps of trees to provide shade and shelter from the wind for people relaxing in the parklands. This was done intentionally. There was no way a large body of men could approach the castle unseen. The ground was open and the view unrestricted for half a kilometer around the castle, preventing any surprise attack in force. Even half a dozen men would be seen quickly from the numerous vantage points on the castle walls. So even though the parkland was pleasing to the eye, it served a far more serious purpose than mere aesthetics, keeping the castle safe from invaders and attackers. They weren't halfway when they saw movement at the main gate. The massive drawbridge was down because it was the middle of the day and there was no perceived threat to the castle. Maddie, watching carefully and knowing what to expect, saw the two sentries on duty at the outer end of the bridge come suddenly to attention as a lone rider emerged from the castle, already moving at full speed. "I wonder who that might be," Maddie drawled with a slow smile as the rider galloped headlong down the hill toward them, her long blonde hair flying behind her in the wind, and the scarf round her throat billowing out to match it. "Could it be your mother, do you think?" Ingrid said, in the same amused tone. "Her Royal Highness the Princess Regent?" Maddie replied. "Surely you don't think she would behave with such a lack of dignity and sense of occasion?" "She did last year," Ingrid told her. "And the year before that," Maddie agreed. She halted Sundancer and stood in her stirrups to wave a greeting to the flying figure rapidly approaching them. Cassandra reined in as she came close, hauling on the reins so that her horse went back on its haunches and slid, stiff-legged, to a stop beside them in a cloud of dust and flying grass. She threw her leg over the pommel and slid lightly to the ground, rushing toward her daughter, arms outstretched. "Maddie, Maddie, you're home at last!" Her voice was high-pitched with excitement. Maddie swung down from the saddle in a more conventional movement. She had barely disentangled her foot from the stirrup when she was overwhelmed by her mother, who squealed with incoherent delight and collided with her daughter as she threw both arms around her and sent the two of them staggering. "Steady on, Mom," Maddie cried breathlessly. "You'll knock me over." Ingrid watched with amusement as Maddie's prediction became a fact. The two women, mother and daughter, lost their balance under the impetus of Cassandra's rush and went sprawling in the neatly mown grass, rolling over and dissolving into gales of laughter. Cassandra was the first to recover, rising to her feet and holding out a hand to help Maddie up. "What a trip," Maddie said, laughing still as she brushed stray strands of grass away from her hair. "First we get stopped by bandits, then my mother barges into me like an angry bull when I think I'm safe home." Instantly, the laughter fled from Cassandra's face as she realized what Maddie had said. It was replaced by a look of concern. "Bandits?" she repeated. "You were held up by bandits? What happened? Are you all right?" "No, Mum," Maddie said straight-faced. "They killed us both. You're looking at our ghosts. Of course we're all right." "But what happened? Were you in danger? When did this happen? Where are they now?" The questions poured out of Cassandra non-stop, her words running together. Maddie held up a hand to stop the flow, but her mother looked up to Maddie's companion. "Ingrid, what happened? For goodness sake, someone give me a sensible answer." Ingrid smiled reassuringly at the worried Princess Regent. "Really, my lady, we were never in any real danger. Your daughter handled the situation easily." "How many were there? Where are they now? Are you sure you're both all right?" Ingrid's unflustered answer did nothing to ease Cassandra's worry. "Honestly, my lady, we're fine. We were never in any real danger." "But what happened?" Cassandra repeated. The pitch of her voice was getting higher and higher as she tried to get answers to her questions. She was actually hopping from one foot to another, a sure sign of the agitation any mother feels when she hears her child has been put in danger. Maddie put a hand on her shoulder to calm her. "Mum, it was fine, really. We were half a day's ride from here, passing through Alder Forest, and these three raggle-tailed ruffians decided they'd rob us. They stepped out onto the track and told us to hand over our valuables." "Were they armed?" Cassandra asked anxiously. Maddie shrugged. "Barely. One had a club, the other had a rather sad-looking bow, and the third had a spear. He was behind us, cutting off our retreat," Ingrid put in. Cassandra glanced up at her quickly. "So you couldn't run away?" Nothing the girls were telling her was making her feel any more reassured. There didn't seem to be any need, Maddie told her. She really couldn't understand why her mother was carrying on so. But then, she wasn't a mother. Ingrid took up the tale again. "Lady Maddie used her sling and smashed the bow. Then she smashed the bowman's shoulder," she said. When she and Maddie were alone, she simply referred to her as Maddie. But in front of her mother, she thought she should show a little more respect. "Then Ingrid whacked the second one with her riding crop," Maddie said. She looked up at her maid. "That's a very handy piece, by the way. I must get one." "You hit him with a riding crop?" Cassandra asked. It didn't sound like a particularly effective way to deal with an armed bandit. Ingrid held up the crop for her to see, pointing to the heavy stone pommel. "It's not an ordinary crop," she said. "It's weighted with lead in the handle, and has this heavy stone at the end." "And then Bumper took care of the third man," Maddie continued. "Sent him flying head over heels. He turned nasty at that, so I broke his arm with my slingshot. Couldn't have him hurting Bumper." She turned to smile at the little horse. He pricked his ears as he heard his name, and whinnied softly. She saw that Cassandra had calmed somewhat, and patted her mother's shoulder again. "Mum, they were just 3 ruffians, and remember, I've been training for 3 years now as a ranger. I've faced much worse situations than this." Cassandra passed a hand over her face. "Don't tell me that. I really don't want to hear that." She put her hands on her daughter's shoulders and looked deep into her eyes. "You're sure you're all right?" she asked, her tone serious. Maddie grinned at her. "I'm fine, Mom. Really. Ingrid could have handled them by herself. She's very capable." Ingrid shook her head, smiling at the statement. When it came to capable, she thought, nobody was more so than her mistress. It amused her that Cassandra didn't realize that her daughter was a highly trained warrior, skilled in the use of bow, sling, and knife. She might be an apprentice still, but an apprentice ranger was a very dangerous person, particularly if you were an oafish, poorly armed ruffian who relied more on bluster and threats than actual skill at arms. Finally, Cassandra seemed to be convinced. She smiled wearily at her daughter and embraced her once more, this time more gently than the first. "Well, If you're sure you're all right. Maddie hugged her warmly. I'm sure, Mom. Really. She stepped back from her mother and held her hands out from her sides for inspection. See? There's not a mark on me. Even though she was joking, she noticed that Cassandra did examine her closely, looking for any possible signs of injury. Finally, the Princess Regent seemed satisfied. She nodded and turned to retrieve her horse, where it was grazing nearby. Well then, in that case, let's go home, Cassandra said. People are waiting to greet you. They remounted, and riding side by side, with barely a meter between them so they could reach across and hold each other's hand, continued in a contented silence up the grassy hill toward the castle. As they came close to the sentries at the outer end of the drawbridge, Cassandra released Maddie's hand and turned to face her. I wouldn't mention that little matter to your father, she said in a low voice. You know how he tends to worry. How he tends to worry? Maddie repeated incredulously. Then, realizing that her mother was deadly serious, she nodded acquiescence. He'll never hear a word from me. Because, knowing her mother, she had a pretty good idea where and when her father would hear about the encounter on the track. There followed several hours where staff and old friends welcomed Maddie home as she did the rounds of the massive castle, greeting people she had known for years. First and foremost, of course, was her father. Horace swept her off her feet in a massive bear hug as she dismounted in the courtyard, holding her well off the ground and spinning her round, saying her name over and over. Finally, having greeted just about everyone, with the exception of her grandfather, King Duncan, she and her parents retired to their apartments in the central keep tower for a private family dinner. You can say hello to Father tomorrow, Cassandra told her. He's very weak these days, and he's resting. I had hoped he might be feeling better, Maddie said, sadness touching her voice. But Horace shook his head. He's not recovering at all. He's getting worse each day. I'm glad you came home. This could be your last chance to see him. She felt tears burning against the back of her eyes. She had known for some time that Duncan's health was deteriorating, which was why her mother had assumed the role of regent in his name, but recognizing that they could soon lose him saddened her immensely. She was quiet for a few minutes, dealing with the knowledge. Horace put his arm gently around her shoulders. But you're home now, and who's to say he won't make a recovery, he said. She forced the tears back and managed a smile. She was genuinely delighted to see her parents once more, and looked forward to exchanging stories with her father, and finding out more about his and Gillen's planned expedition to deal with the mysterious Red Fox clan. In the back of her mind, she was already scheming to see if she could accompany them. They sat down to one of her favorite meals, slow-roasted lamb shoulder, flavored with rosemary and wild garlic, accompanied by crisp roasted potatoes and steamed greens. The richly flavored meat had been roasting in a covered iron camp kettle for almost 3 hours, and it simply fell from the bone as she plunged her knife and eating fork into it. That's good, she said. That's as good as Jenny makes it. Her mother smiled. She had actually prepared the meal herself. It's Jenny's recipe, she said, but I'm glad you approve of my cooking. They ate in pleasurable silence for several minutes, and then Horace set down his eating implements and studied his daughter. She looked older, he thought, and then realized that she was older, and that at her age, a year was a relatively large amount of time. She looked fit and healthy, and there was a new air of confidence about her, one that he approved of. Unlike his wife, he was more than happy that Maddie was training as a ranger. She was learning tactical and strategic skills, and the ability to analyze a situation quickly and intelligently, which would come in handy when she finally took the throne. So, what have you been up to? He asked. Instantly, Cassandra unleashed a pent-up torrent of words. What has she been up to? I'll tell you. She was set upon by robbers barely half a day's ride from here, attacked, and had to fight for her life. We're lucky to have her still with us, and it's your fault. My fault? Horace said mildly. She nodded vigorously, pointing an accusing fork in his direction so that he recoiled slightly. Your fault for encouraging her to go ahead with his ranger business, instead of staying safe at home with us. He looked at her steadily until she subsided, a little red-faced, and embarrassed by her outburst. So what happened? He asked Maddie. It was nothing, Dad, really. They were 3 clumsy thugs who tried to hold us up. I took one down with my sling, Ingrid brained the second, and Bumper took care of the third. Then what did you do with them? Maddie shrugged. We tied them up and handed them off to a manor lord along the way, a Sir Gerald something or other. That'd be Sir Gerald Walden, Horace said. I'll send him a note of thanks. Then he grinned. You say Ingrid brained one? Maddie returned the smile. With her riding crop. Knocked him cross-eyed with the hilt. Horace looked impressed. Well, good for her. He caught Cassandra's eye and nodded toward the platter of lamb. I wonder, could you serve me a couple more slices? He said. It's very good. Cassandra sighed and shook her head at his total lack of concern. You are obviously not a mother, she said. Horace raised his eyebrows. Thank goodness for that. All right, that is going to conclude Chapter 7. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I will see you all next time in Chapter 8. God bless, and have a good one.